Seeking right to left isn't working for some reason. Let me take a look into that. Hey Brett, thanks for coming. Command move right. Yeah, this is set up to seek alphanumeric or camel case. Yep, these need to be there we go. Cool, okay. So some of the basic little edits work in the multi-gap buffer now, but I'm still not convinced that single edits work, because those basically should only be tripping one of the major paths, not even the more complicated path. So if you watched my last video, the only thing that's changed since then, and something I'm going to be leaning on a lot this time, is I've got this function for multi-gap buffer, which I've been abbreviating MuGaB here and there. I got this MuGaB check function, which basically makes sure that everything in the state of the buffer makes sense. Make sure that the count is, the other thing I should do actually is, since I don't ever run this check, during an edit loop, edit stage should be 0. Just making sure that the state of everything is correct. Grow gaps equals 0. So basically I can just run this function and it'll assert a bunch of important stuff, and so then I can see as soon as something goes wrong. Because I was having a bug where the size was getting off, and I have to make sure, like, there's all sorts of complex stuff that changes these variables that all have to have a fixed sum, and all these different things have to always be true. So I just set up this check function that checks all of the state of the buffer. And I fixed a little bug, but for the most part it's just barely working. And I'm going to do a little bit more of basic single edits to see if I can break it that way. But it's starting to feel like it's settling down. Right, like I can't go off the edge anymore like I was doing before. Oh, there it goes. There it goes. That doesn't make too much sense. Data loop. You gave me a data of 0. Well, is it true that one of the things in the buffer is size 0? I mean, that shouldn't be causing a bug anyway, first of all. If the size is 0, then my position shouldn't be 6553. Yeah. Well, this is Backify, which is a pretty tricky one, so I wouldn't be totally surprised to find out that there's a bug in here. I'll just try going to the bottom, and then I'll seek up and see if, yeah, okay, so it's something we can reproduce. Let's do that again. Seek up. Okay, so what's the state of the loop right now? data is null, and the absolute position is 0, the size is... Yeah, this is like all totally senseless. None of this makes any sense. Like, nothing can be that big. That's the biggest any chunk can ever be in this buffer, so that doesn't make sense. Chunk I is 26, so that's probably where the problem is coming from. I launched Backify, and the problem is right in there. Okay. What's going on in here? Right start ends up being exactly equal to size, I bet, and that's why chunk I comes out as 26. That needs to be -1. I bet this one up here, yeah, so I do have a -1 on that end. I need a -1 on this end. Seek up. Okay, let's see what we get this time. So chunk I comes out as 25 now. So we actually get like a valid gap. Okay. Seems better. There could still be problems with the Backify, so I should do some stuff that will stress that. Okay, so I was able to seek up pretty far. I should look into that because I think that's an unrelated bug, but it might be a multi-gap buffer bug. See if I can control up all the way to the top. Alright, we got all the way to the top with that. Maybe the Backify works now? Almost certainly not, but maybe. There was one little issue. When I was all the way at the bottom, I tried to go up, it didn't work. But I want to test the same issue here on a different buffer type. Oh. Right. So buffer MuGaB check requires that the experiment scalpel be set to 2. That doesn't work either. So it could just be about the seek up function and not the actual streaming functions. But let me test one more time on the golden array. Yep, none of them work. Okay. Hello, Andrew. How's it going? Okay, so I need to look at buffer abstract. That's where it will contain seek white space up. Yes. Okay, so 1 minute. Alright, good. Hello, Cuber Caleb. There's a bug in here. Starts the loop from the current position. Let's see. This will just make more sense to me if I walk through it. Put that break back in. Down to the bottom. Control up. Yeah, so the position I set in was equal to the size to begin with, which means it's getting the same issue it usually gets. But that's more like something that all of them are going to suffer from. Probably what I want to do is start from a position where I subtract one from position, maybe? If it's not white space, then you get out of there. Yeah, I probably should do is subtract one here. It seems like maybe that'll be best. Hello, Purposely Drifting. How's it going? Uh-huh. That worked. Up, 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 up. Let's go back to the top. No, I do not have a top comment. What am I doing? No top comment. Yep, so that looks like it has fixed the moving up. Okay, so now getting back to focused on the buffer edit. The whole point that I'm actually looking at is if I can edit this. So let me go back to running some tests. I want to test like just a little bit more of like spamming inserts. I don't think I've tried like doing inserts here and then switching to a different gap buffer. And one thing I could do for debug purposes is have like a thing where I output which mini buffer each thing comes from. And yeah, looks like I can insert individual characters sort of everywhere, and it's just fine. But I was thinking I could do a thing where I tell when I'm creating the data for rendering, I could include in like the unit that says here's a character to render. It could also say here's the chunk it came from. Then I could like visually represent chunks with different highlight colors, which might be useful for this particular thing, because I can't really visualize where chunks are in this system, right? I can't tell if I'm creating new ones or not. So I'm going to do that real quick just because it sounds like a bit of fun, and then I'll get to other stuff. So, to do that, that's an abstract get render data. Yes, when I write out an item, I just want to also add in item chunk I equals loop dot chunk I. I'll add this everywhere, and obviously this will have to be a temporary addition since not every buffer type supports separate chunks. Brett, I don't have a lot of time to explain everything. It's been it's been about 16 or 17 days of work, but what I can do for you and anyone else is offer that you go check out the GitHub, because I've got most of the cool stuff that I'm working on is available here. The editor itself isn't open sourced here, but all of my buffer experiments are, and this is what I'm working on. So that's a pretty good place to spend a little time checking it out. But basically the idea is I've got different types of buffers, and if you use the abstract layer just is a bunch of other features that the buffers basically just have to implement how to stream data in and out, and how to stream data out and how to edit it, right? And the abstract layer takes care of the rest. So if you want to check it out, there's a tip for some time, or whenever, which is what sometimes meant when I said it, so it's kind of redundant, but hello Miblo. So I have now just invented this idea that items know what render chunk they come from, which means I need to go to the shared definitions. Render item. Yeah, so I'm going to add like a temporary int chunk I right here, and hopefully that's all good. Okay, so everything just sort of keeps working, which is fabulous. Next up, I would like to add in highlighting colors based on that information. So that happens here where I do draw file view. Basically, the way the drawing works, since I don't think I've explained this yet, is you make an array of render items. This is in order to abstract out how I render any particular buffer from how I in 4coder do rendering. that I'm looking for. Somewhere in here, it's gotta be. Right, draw file view. Here's the bar, set everything up. Whether to use the token stack, do I not? Where's the, wait, there's the temp memory. Okay, so here I get the render items. You can see I've got an array of them. And then this function here fills up all the information about render items, which tells the thing where characters need to go on the screen in order to draw the file, basically. Which character goes where, and information about the dimensions of that character, basically. And that's useful because that means I can figure out how to lay the thing out separately from just looping over all that data and drawing them. And I can do all sorts of neat stuff with that separation, such as what I'm about to do here, where I look at an item, what's the name of this thing I'm looking for? It's sort of a chunk highlight, and I'll have like a quick array of these temporarily too. Chunk highlights, and I'll just make a couple. I can't remember. So let me see, I saw a question earlier, a question mark. Oh, purposely drifting was asking. I haven't heard about the alpha from Martin yet. I know he was streaming recently. It seemed pretty seemed fine. I wasn't able to watch the whole thing or much of it, but seems like he's still working on interesting stuff there. Okay, what I need real quick is an example. Oh shoot, is an example of my color stuff. Okay, so alpha does come first. I asked myself that because I'd like to actually put lower alpha on this so that it's not super bright. Then I can just do basic colors after that. Okay, so that gives us a good set of 6 colors rotating through. What I could do, see if this is kind of an interesting idea or not. There we go. Okay. So then I'll just set this to chunk highlight chunk highlight index ++. Grab that, set it to 0 to begin with, and then anytime, okay, the other thing I have to do is current chunk. Current chunk is take this item and look at the chunk eye. Okay. This is going to be so neat, guys. It's going to be so cool. I'm so excited about this. So, it gives me a chunk, and then after every step, what I can do is go, here I have a new item. Chart color cursor begins. Okay. if if the item's chunk I is greater than the current chunk, then what I want to do is put that there. Chunk highlight. Chunk highlights. Current chunk equals item chunk I. Right, so whenever it's going across these items in order, it says, hey, which chunk is this from? If the chunk has increased, let's go to the next color. The other thing I have to do is actually say if the chunk highlight index is greater than or equal to this array count of chunk highlights, then do a modulo operation there. Okay. So that's going to make sure it doesn't wrap over. And then highlight color. Highlight. Am I not drawing the highlights in? There's a good chance I'm not even drawing in highlights now that I'm looking through my code. Set temp highlight, cursor move. Temp highlight. That's all about the temp highlight. Yeah, I'm not drawing in. Wow, okay. So, where do I draw in the cursor color? Draw a rectangle. Ah, okay, so really the highlight stuff is all right here, and the idea should be if I'm inside the cursor range, else if I have a highlight color, then draw a rectangle for that. Otherwise, if I have a chunk highlight color, draw a rectangle for that. Alright, let's see if this looks any better. Oh, cool. Oh, shoot. Okay, that makes sense. So it doesn't... Okay, so better idea. Instead of having a chunk highlight index, just to make those colors static, what I'll do will be a little bit more like this. Current chunk, array count, chunk highlights. Right, and then down here when I'm updating the current chunk, I'll update the current chunk first. Well, let me save this. Update that. I'll put this in right here, and that should be all I need. That way it doesn't change the offset of chunk coloring as I'm looking at two chunks. So there's the boundary between two chunks. Here's another boundary right here. And this is causing some rendering problems because it forces so many color switches in OpenGL, and I'm not doing anything near smart enough to do this the right way. Hello, Shadow Walker, if you're still there. Thanks for coming by. Yeah, Cuber Caleb, the lerp is there so that it can smooth scroll rather than doing like what this does, where when you scroll up it just puts in the new position. Right, so if you scroll in this down one, you don't see the text move, it just jumps to its new location. It's just suddenly rendered there. For this to smooth scroll, it doesn't just jump there, it says here's where I'm trying to get to, but here's where I actually am, and then it lerps to that location. So over several frames, the location where it's drawing moves towards that spot, and you can see it scroll locking in smoothly. So we got these chunk colors, which are pretty cool. Now I can like play with them and make sure everything there makes sense. So far so good. Let me do an edit right at the boundary of two chunks. Nice. Nice. Okay, so that all works. Actually, what I'm doing isn't just lerp. The problem with doing just lerp is it takes off too fast, like launches too fast. So I actually have it takes the min of two different things, which is it has like it's more like a physics lerp. Let me see if I can find game camera reason. I'll take a quick break from my normal talk or my normal work to find this really cool video game 2D camera talk. Okay, so anyone who's interested in game programming or game design should really check this out. I'll post a link in the chat if you're with me right now so you can take a look. Right, so this is extremely interesting information about two-dimensional cameras in video games, which is somewhat related to the question of smooth scrolling because it's quite a bit like a camera, right? Which is why I've pulled it up, because it's related. And the folks who are making or who were making Mushroom 11, this game, did put this together, and it's absolutely superb. And they have a term in here called physics smoothing. Here it is. That you can see, like, they've got an example here. Super Meat Boy is lerp smoothing, and so it's always lerping towards Meat Boy. This one over here is physics smoothing, which they describe as being a little bit more of an ease in, ease out, so it accelerates and then slows down. And mine is actually a little bit of a physics smoothing situation, where it's actually using lerp to do some of the math, but it also involves a velocity variable that you're lerping, not just a position variable. So you sort of get like the acceleration towards a position, but it also, like, if it's a long jump, it doesn't like hit some sort of max speed, because just accelerating and then decelerating is too slow to go over long jumps. So I spent some time looking through this, figuring out how to set the smooth scrolling up just the way I want, and there's still, like, over extremely large, like several thousands of lines, it takes too long. So, like, I have to do some kind of trick where I start going and then jump it and then slow down again, I think. But yeah, this is definitely worth checking out for all sorts of super fancy lerp and other camera related information. Anyways, yeah, so right around the boundaries here, it looks like this is working. Ooh, that's interesting. It's not so much, my left to right motion isn't working so much. Like, it's stopping there and it shouldn't, right? That shouldn't cause a stop, even though it is causing a stop. Interesting. Okay, so there's something to debug. Let's do that before I do anything else, because that's probably a problem with the streaming of the data. Let me stop and restart and get a smoother repo of that though. Okay. Yep, there it is. So right there, you can see it's stopping me on the C, which it normally skips over any alphanumerics that are sequential. Right there, we've got a problem. So, let me find abstract. Don't need you. How about seek? What am I doing? Seek camel. I think I'm using seek camel. Alphanumeric or camel is what I believe I'm using. And it's broken on both left and right. So it could be a problem with the algorithm, but most likely not. Because I don't know why that would be. Boom. Alright, so this is the one where it stops too soon. Interesting, the alphanumeric position stops at 496 already, so it might not even be here, it might be in the alphanumeric seek that something goes wrong. So I'm gonna actually say ignore that, let's look at the alphanumeric seek. Miblo, yeah, that webpage was causing my computer to slow down a little bit too. There are a ton of GIFs on it, which is a little unfortunate. Hey, Martin. I've got a fix with gap buffer here, and I'm highlighting the chunks separately so that I can do some stuff. I think it's pretty neat. So anyway, seek to the right again. Let's see what happens. So it's stringifying forward. Figures out the gap that it's on. Chunk I 0. Okay, great. And I'm sure this comes out right. I think it's on the next, because normally everything works when I don't have to stream over the edge of a gap. The edge of two gaps. Okay, so the end position is 496. This is going to 4. Alright, and this is going to say position. Oh, interesting. So position just went all the way to end, didn't it? 496. Yes. And so it's going to think that's a breakpoint, and it's not. Well, that just means it's time to introduce gotos there. As I've been easing into using gotos a lot, I really don't know why people don't use them. The only thing I haven't done yet is tested to see if they mess with compiler optimization, maybe? Because I could see that being an issue, but like just using them for double nested breaks is like, makes my life so much easier. Everything like that anyone's ever told me about programming, like that macros are harder to debug than templates, that gotos are harder to debug than loops, is like always false when I just try what seems most natural to me. It almost always is just easier. So I don't really know what's going on there, but it sure makes it hard to trust that gotos have a problem. Okay, so position is less than end, and then what we'll do is each time we'll say if this thing is not alphanumeric, go to buffer seek alphanumeric right mid. End. Yeah, I wouldn't want to go too crazy with my go-tos. Honestly, I just try to use them only for the purpose of doubly nested breakouts. Like, because I can't do that, go-to is just the correct way to break out of things. I think the thing is, go-tos probably are too powerful, like, if you use them with all their power, but they also completely not using them because of that is absurd when it forces you to, like, I would have to introduce an extra variable here and an extra check of if, and it would triple the complexity of my control flow, and goto actually is making a simpler control flow in this case, so it just makes it hard. All I'm saying is, normally stuff like this trips me up more than what this is doing, and so each one of these little experiments I do that confirms that, continues to confirm this doubt I have that I should trust any of the things I read when I was younger. Missing parent. Alright, so that, I bet, is going to be better. But I won't know for sure until I test it. And I have to do it for the left as well. You can, like, there's a perfect example. This is what I'm talking about. As soon as I did the more natural thing with the goto, it's working, right? And you could say, oh, but that's because you knew what the bug was, but everything else doesn't get bugs like this. Like, if I do seek up and down, it doesn't get that bug. And I haven't had to debug anything except for this, which is the only one where I didn't use goto, even though I thought maybe I could. So, doing goto first has made most things easier. Buffer seek alpha numeric left mid. There it is. So that issue is fixed. Back to the more pressing issue of, yeah, it basically just works now. Oh. Oh, whoa, what was that? That was sort of nuts. Okay, let me look at that again. I think it was deleting the first character of the chunk that would have caused that. Because I delete that, it's fine. I delete this. and Crazy Town. So somehow that deleted the whole chunk. Okay. So we're not out of the woods yet. The simple edits still have problems on the chunk boundaries, and that's why I pull those chunk boundaries up. So let me do a second thing just to test a hypothesis. I was deleting the C, but now I'm going to backspace the C. Okay, good. Now I need to put down a breakpoint. That would be here. Not during stringify. I can probably just get rid of my breakpoints now. I only had one. Wow. Okay. I want to put a breakpoint in my edit. There it is. And now let's see what's going on. Okay. So, didn't mean to F11 that, but there you have it. Size, pass those asserts, sure. So we're deleting one character, it knows that much. Says, okay. Here's all of the gaps. The gap where I'm starting should be gap 1. The gap where I'm ending should also be gap 1. Very good. Keeper Caleb says that he would agree with me that recursion is worse than goto. And he adds especially indirect recursion. Yeah, I really don't like recursion. I don't know if I've mentioned that before, if that's what you're discussing, but I basically have made a rule that I do not recursively call functions ever in C++ code. Edit stage equals 0, -1. Alright, so I grab a gap. This right here is saying, do everyone pass this point? And it doesn't. Okay, we know that this works because I have that MuGaB check that says that the buffer is still valid. It's just deleting more than it should be. Edit stage equals 1. Gap starts not less than gap end, so it's going to go to edit stage 2. Shift amount -1. Start. End should be 1. Very good. If end is greater than that, shouldn't be. End is 1. Elephant, the only time recursion makes sense to me is like for throwaway projects, because almost indefinitely, or almost invariably I mean to say, when I've implemented serious programs with recursion, I've always wished that I had done the work, even for my parser, right? I've always avoided doing it recursively, because anytime I try to add a nice feature to a recursive function, it becomes much more difficult. But if I am just like I have one exception to this rule actually. I have to become clean. Quicksort I always write with recursion, because I can whip quicksort out so fast if I do it recursively that it's just worth it, right? So that's like the one exception where in my serious code I'll use recursion for quicksort. Alright. So there's the data. The original size is 4096. End is less than size 1, so it's going to move everybody 20. Yep, everyone but that first character. 4095. 1. Okay. Size of 1. Maybe the bug happens when... I'll bet you the bug happens when the size is 0, because the size of this goes to 0, and size 2 is now 4095, and it checks out, it adds up, but it doesn't render correctly. I'll bet you that that is because it doesn't stream correctly over that chunk now. The thing is, if you do a loop with a stack instead of recursion, you have to allocate that stack yourself, but that means you're explicitly controlling the stack, and like it can be an unbounded stack much more than your call stack can be. When you take advantage of the call stack, it's implicit, but the memory usage is still happening. And I've seen people like forget that that's true and say like that quicksort has 0.1 memory usage, which is not true. It takes memory to do quicksort. It's just you're implicitly using the call stack for your memory. And since that's like a black box actually and like in C and C++, the call stack's quite obscured from you. It's not totally. You can get at it, but it doesn't like open the call stack up to you to just browse around. That means that it's really just eschewing your use of memory in a way that I prefer not to play with anyway, right? Okay, so what I want to do is I want to assume that the edit has actually worked. Okay, I suspect that this is where I'll begin the loop, starting at 3482, which should come out to the first gap, yep, ending on the 25th gap, but it's not actually going to go that far, it'll be fine, and it's going to go there. Okay, so it starts rendering. Now what I want to say is next time there's a buffer stringify next, I want to stop. Okay, so chunk I does not equal chunk end, so we don't do this part. Position is not less than size 1, so we don't do this part, which means we advance to the next chunk, we look at the gap, and we say, okay, what's our position? and our position is 0. The absolute position is somewhere in the, like at the start of the thing, and the temporary end is right there. Okay. And then the chunk I is 1. That's not the end chunk. Temp end greater than that? No. So the size comes out to 0, and the data comes out to that, which should just is, we're just going to ignore, right, because it's 0, right? So let's see if that actually happens. End is 496 still. Data is there, which is fine. I equals 496. I is not less than end, so it should go on to the next stage of next again. Chunk I is still not big enough to get out. Position's not less than size 1. There it is. So if the position is 0, and the size is 0, you have an unusual circumstance, right? So you see the problem here? I can't just do any old willy-nilly thing. I was just saying if the position's less than the size, Bob's my uncle, I know that I'm in the part of the loop where I'm before the left-hand side, but there's the unusual case where position is not less than size and it's 0, but I can't just say if position is less than or equal to size, because normally when position is less than or equal to size, that means that I'm at the beginning of the next chunk over, right? Because I have the whole mini gap buffer is 2 small chunks like this, and size 1 ends right here, right? And if you're going from here to here, right, and here's the middle point, you start at 0, you go down to here, and then your position is equal there. So when your position is equal to size 1, that usually means you're on this chunk, not on this chunk. So it's more like I want to check if... Got it. Okay. Okay. Wait, what if the size of this is 0? If the size of this is 0, then my position plus my size would tell me that I was equal to this, and in the first chunk. Well, one thing I could do is say right here, if the first chunk is 0, yeah, if I handle it here, the problem would go away. So that's what I'll do. Okay, then the next question is, if size 1 happens to be exactly 0, then what I want to do is set the temp end to equal fixed width buffer size. Right, because temp end is the only thing preventing this from becoming this now, right? Because the position will still be... Oh, so I gotta add in the gap size too. So the position would be gap size. The absolute position would be the start position plus 0, which is what it is. The temporary end would be this, which is what it is. So that basically skips me ahead to the next step. So when I have a 0 first, it'll skip me ahead. What if I have a 0 second? It'll come through here and do this first, and this will be this will put the position at 0, and the size 1 is non-zero. And then it comes through on the next part and goes, oh, the position of this is 0. Since that's non-zero, it's less than that, and it'll go to there where the temp and the gap size there should be enough that that adds up to 0, and then the next time through it will position would be equal to size then, or actually greater than size if gap size is non-zero, right? It'd be greater than size, and the next time through it would advance to the next whole gap. So that probably works out. It does raise the question of what do I want to do when I delete everything inside of a chunk. I probably want to make sure that I say, oh, if this chunk has just become totally empty, go ahead and swap it into the area at the of the buffer that stores the unused allocated chunks, and then shift the other chunks in their relative positions to each other, right? So I'll have to add that to my short-term to-do list. Cool. Problem solved. Alright, I'm going to go to a bathroom break. I'll be right back. Alright, so back to it. The last thing I got done was I just finished making it so I can delete something at the beginning of a chunk and not have stuff go crazy. It'd be nice to know that if I delete the right hand side of a chunk, it doesn't go crazy, right? Right? So what I should really be doing, actually, is when I'm getting render data, I can separate it out into the chunks, and also each chunk into the left hand and right hand sub-chunks, if you will. So, to do that is just all these places where I have chunk guy, I'm going to do ×2 plus something 1 else 0, right? And that would something would be basically if loop dot position is greater than or equal to if loop dot position is greater than or equal to the size of the size 1 of the chunk. Do I have a good way of getting that? It wouldn't be terrible. I mean, this is throwaway code since it's just for debugging this one particular buffer type. So I take chunk I size 1. Then the only question is, does this work when size 1? Oof. Actually, yes it does, because we always skip over 0 chunks, right? So that's fine. Cool. 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 Uh-oh. Not cool. Oh, they're not called chunks, they're called gaps. Cooler, cooler, cooler. Let me make sure that compiles before I go on changing it everywhere. It doesn't. I got the question mark and the colon wrong. Wow. Okay, nice. So let me just delete all of these actually, because that seems like the easiest way to make this happen now. Okay, so the first one works now. So I can put it everywhere and know that it will work everywhere. Cool. So now I can see chunks and also subchunks. Okay, so that's where the divide exists. I should do some investigating there, but that one's all white space. And then the old divide. Why is this so long? That shouldn't go on for that long. Is this like one of those things where ternary is all really weird and it ignores? It's like oh, it has really bad precedence rules. That's right. Okay, so I have to go one more time through all of these and make sure that they're all correctly parenthesized, because it thinks that that plus is a part of the question mark expression, because it's such a low precedent operator. That's the real reason not to use this. I have no problem with the blanket rule against this, if anyone has one, because ternary really is a pain. Caleb asks, after you compile from within the editor, can you go back to the file that was previously in the window? That wouldn't be too hard to do. It's not, I mean, it wouldn't be too hard to do as in if you have access to the API. it shouldn't be too hard to do. There's not like a built-in button for it, but that's just a matter of if you want a button that says build and then go back to the file that was here before, that would just, you could just write a little command that says like, well, I guess it depends on whether you want it to be something that happens when the compilation finishes, or like you just launch the compilation and then switch right away. I guess if when the compilation finishes, there's no like hooks right now for when compilation finishes do this, or like when you start a compilation you can't say when finished do this, which would be a good thing for me to add, but it's just still pretty primitive. So right now, if you have built-in controls, you just switch back to it manually, but it's, you know, it's very young. Going back with a hotkey, so at any time while it's compiling or in the middle of, or when it's done, right? Yeah, it's a little bit tricky, but I mean, it's not crazy hard. It's just going to be a matter of me expanding on that system a little bit. I want to do a lot of stuff with having sub-processes, like child processes, because I want to have the ability to do something like bundle 4coder with a second small program that you can use outside of 4coder, but then if you launch 4coder, you can optionally launch this other program as a sub-process and manage it from within 4coder. And that'd be for like things like if you have a file save loop in 4coder that you enable and you want a thing that like tracks versions every 15 seconds or something like this. So I want to have a lot of flexibility in how you manage the processes. But I'm just sort of doing that as a side thing for when I'm not in the mood for this multi-gap buffer stuff and related. There we go. So that's back to doing what it was doing before, except now we can see pre and post portions of the chunks. And you can see when I delete that, it just moved everything to being pre, but then I can insert other characters and it moves them to post, right? So every time I do an insert, it has like, we can see the shift of characters from one chunk to the other, which is how the gap buffer works, and the gap is always between these two. And then characters here, if I insert here, for example, that puts everybody there. If I'm in this buffer and I insert a character, that put everyone but the E on the left hand side, which is interesting for sure. Very cool. So next I need to do some stress testing here and there and see if I can find anything else that breaks it. One thing I'd like to do is, it seems like the boundary between like yellow and green here is doing fine, but what about the boundary here? Can I do anything to break that? You know? It seems actually fairly solid. What if I delete between there and there? That's fine. What if I do a range delete on this side? What if I do a range delete on this side? It's all pretty good. What if I copy this? Wait, what if I copy this and paste it? I can't tell if that was right because I wasn't very clever about that. Okay, so what I need is an A here, and a B here, an A here. Now I've got a nice range. I can copy it, paste, paste, paste. Seems to be pretty solid. Okay, so I believe that all of the small stuff works. So the next big test that I can conjure up is switching to my stress test script. Now that I have the ability to run a child process, it comes with a, other than compiling in the editor, which is a feature I needed to have some excuse me, that I needed to have someday. It comes with the added bonus that I can run stress tests really easily now. So to do that, what I do is I come over here to my build function, build, which right now is set up to call build all test, and I just run test. Right, so I'm setting it up to run the test script, and the test script just spams a lot of stuff out, which tests that the editor, that it can handle like repeated writes. It'll also test the empty file. Okay, here we go. Okay, good. So that breaks it right away, which is exactly what we want to see. It catching bugs. Get render data. So it's having trouble rendering this because the item is fine. Item chunk I. Oh, it's trying to look something up in a gap that it can't look up. So what I should say is this one here doesn't do any of that nonsense because it's sort of like gonna be there even when there's nothing to draw. So it's like a special case where it's okay to, it's supposed to be outside of the file, right? So for that particular case, this test code was maybe not appropriate. Oh, and additionally, neither was this. But just for that one case. Alright, now we're breaking somewhere inside the actual multi-gap buffer file, which is good news. Mem copying to data being null. Alright, so that's the name of the game. We got some data here, and we got it from a gap buffer, which looks valid, but it's actually null. So why did that happen? Well, it came in here to do an insert. It found gap start and end of 0 and 0. So I wonder if I initialize this with 0 chunks, because maybe I want a rule that I always put in a few chunks. Yeah, so that should be a rule. So if I initialize, when I'm initializing, oops, buffer multi, okay. When I'm doing an init, begin the init, chunk count, I'll set a minimum value on that chunk count to be like 4, right? Or maybe, yeah, we'll do 4. So if this chunk count here is less than 4, it goes to 4, right? That way we always have some chunks. And actually, that's not so good. Int chunk real, right? So we'll also have a chunk real which doesn't cheat like that. That way I can tell it what its chunk count is and what its alloc is. And then what I can do is say that's alloc, and then I can switch real to count, which is the name I actually want it to have. Got to do a little, since I don't have code transforms at this juncture, I have to do a little dancing to get all the names to shuffle out correctly, or to settle in correctly, or shake out correctly, I think is the word that I was looking for, the phrase that I was looking for. Chunk alloc. Chunk alloc. Chunk real. Now I can set this to count, which is the name I wanted it to have, but I wanted it for like the one other than the one that was named count, if that makes sense. So to make sure that the errors didn't misguide me, I stuck in that temporary name. There we go. So I'm not really convinced that that will do a ton of good though. I mean, that just means that when I get some alloc, well, basically what I have to do now is whenever I insert text, and that's at replace range, whenever I'm here getting ready to insert some text, I have to look and see if my gap start happens to be past gap count, right? So basically if I'm right here, yeah, so all I have to do is validate that gap real quick. So if gap start is exactly equal to the buffer's gap or chunk count, then, such as will be the case when I insert text into an empty buffer, then I want to take the current gap, set its gap size to buffer fixed with buffer size, and I want to set its size 1 and 2 to 0. And I want to set its gap start position to be exactly equal to start. I failed my init success check. That's interesting. And init. Okay. So what is it that it checked? It checked that chunk max is greater than or equal to init size divided by... Okay, that shouldn't have failed. It shouldn't have failed this part. If gap data so this isn't superb, but as usual I can't really suss it out from just reading the code. So I have to use the debugger. I suspect that it's going through this path though, so I'm gonna just check that suspicion. Whoops, not what I wanted to do. Alt-M. There it is, it went through that path. Why did you go through that path? Your data is definitely 0, but who are you? What is your count? How is your count 4? I thought I carefully made sure that the count and the alloc... jeez, it still came out backwards. Here I was talking about moving things around to make sure it comes out right. And I went and got it wrong. Okay, this one needs to be alloc, this one needs to be alloc. Okay, so we got to the point where I was drawing the empty file correctly. It was just later we got a problem. Looks like that was during a MuGaB check. So, it went to do an edit, and afterwards the total size was 0, but size here was 141. Oh, I know what that would be. Yep, so another thing I have to do is when I'm doing that like slightly fancy trick right here where I initialize this, I need to take the chunk count and increase it by 1. And of course this will only even work if the chunk count is small enough. Right, so if this is less than the allocked portion, otherwise all sorts of hell has to break loose again with the memory. So, here it is. It's not really anything like that though. I'm not sure why I even bothered to copy that. Doesn't really have anything to do with that. So, okay, result equals 1. Go to this position, required amount, requested amount equals fixed width buffer size, and that should get us 1, but that assumes that we have room for a new buffer to come in, so I also have to check that the allocked size is less than the chunk max. Martin, if you're watching this, maybe you could give me a pointer on why mine has turned out so complicated. I don't know if you had a better way of handling this that didn't lead to so many like corner cases, or if you just put the time in and figured it out. But whichever it was, I'd love to hear about it, because this particular, like, figuring out where I need new chunks and how to make sure I know which chunks I have, and removing them in the right order and putting them in the right order, blah blah blah, has turned out to be no small pain in my ass. So the other thing I have to do is set the buffer to set the buffer to that requested amount. And some of this is because of my asinine methods of memory management that I prefer, but I think some of this would still be at least a little bit crazy. Maybe it's just, well, I guess if you can just inline allocate, it becomes a lot easier. I don't know if you are allowing yourself that or not. I basically never do allow myself that. Okay. Right now what I'm dealing with is a situation where basically an unusual corner case that is mostly important with the empty file, but it comes up on other cases too, where in general I have to do a lot of craziness when I insert a character into the middle of the file. But when I insert to the end of the very end of the file, I hadn't considered that, and it's especially important for an empty file, that sometimes what I want to do is put a new chunk at the end to contain that character, or characters or whatever, and that's different because it's not like, when it figures out which chunk I did the edit in, it comes up to the conclusion that I'm not in any of the chunks, and that I'm like on the chunk past the end, and so then it has to make sure that that's actually in the array of chunks, and then it has to actually allocate that chunk. And so it's like sometimes I have to do it sometimes I have to do one allocation to grow the array of chunks, and then I have to do another array to actually get because my array of chunks is pointer to chunks. Maybe you just have a bunch of chunks in one big chunk, but I have like an array, and that array contains pointers to chunks as well as a little bit of metadata for each fixed width gap buffer inside the whole thing. And so sometimes I have to go, oh, I need something off the end. Do we have any space there? Oh, we don't, so grow this array first. Now grab this thing, and I'll get more memory for this thing to point to. And I don't know if that's what you did or if you had some way to simplify the memory down. But it seemed like if you just did one big memory chunk, you throw away a lot of the advantage of fixed width gap buffers to begin with. Like, if you're trying to go for not copying much data around when you resize and when you need to insert new gaps and stuff. I don't know, unless you, except for the linked list method, if you do a linked list it probably falls into place in a much easier way. Even then, the way I would do the linked list would still be complicated. In order for me to have memory generality. Okay, so this works. What about Alt-M? Alright, so it works for a little while, and then it breaks. Interesting. So it looks like it's done 2 inserts, I'll betcha, and that something went wrong on the first one that left in a slightly weird state. Okay, here we're on the second insert, break. Wait. I think the call stack is messed up. It's got... Yeah, that has certainly messed up the call stack somehow. Because look at this. Can you all see this? It looks like it says that it went through the callback here. Oh, that's for redrawing the screen. Why is it doing the replace range? Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? Okay, so I need to have a little bug in my main application layer there that I probably don't want to have, which is I need, when I'm having an app step, force redraw time step. Yeah, Martin, I'm starting with I'm starting with one chunk, and I could say that that's the only case where it's weird. But even with the empty chunk, it's an unusual case because the thing still like. I guess what I should be doing is maybe. I don't know. Anytime I edit at the end of the file, it doesn't matter if it's empty or got a bunch of stuff in it. If it's at the very end of the file, it detects that. Oh, that's actually a big problem. So what I needed to do is when it's at the end of the file, go back one, because otherwise it's going to insert a chunk every time I insert a character at the end of the file. Okay. So that's a good thing to know. I need to actually nix some of that stuff I was doing over there, but while I'm here, one sec. Okay, what I was saying is whenever I edit at the end of the file, right now it's adding a new gap, but if you do a bunch of successive edits there, that's going to cause a problem. But for this, when I'm updating the process pipes, I need to make sure that it's an actual time step and not a redraw step. So that's interesting. Okay. So that fixes one thing. Okay, so alright, so let me look at what Martin's saying, see what his version looks like. So you have three parts, P1, P0, 1, and 2. P0 tells you how many bytes would fit into the target buffer. Oh, and before this you figure out which buffer you can insert into, or like what position you need to insert into. It tells you how many bytes fit into the target buffer. P1 is how many bytes would fit to the whole new chunks. I'm not sure what you mean by P1. P2, how many data would fit to last chunk? I'm not sure I follow you on how this works exactly. I think basically a major difference that I've never been able to figure out if you and I do the same thing here between our systems is the conception of an edit that I use, which is obviously if you have delete and insert, you can just make that happen. Which is that I delete a section, I replace one section of text with another section of text. And so the process that I go through is more like I take a look at the range that I'm going to do an insert, and I make sure that everything is aligned so that I have enough chunks of, like, I have enough mini buffers there in case I am inserting something larger than the width of a buffer or something, or if the thing I'm inserting doesn't fit inside the gap, right? For whatever reason, if I need more stuff there or less stuff there, I make sure I have that done. And that is basically a question of how many buffers do I delete and move out. How do I adjust the beginning and end buffers that aren't totally deleted, and then how many new buffers do I need to fit the new text, and then I put it in there. Yeah, maybe on this one it's easier not to do replace. Replace was very easy for a golden array and a gap buffer, but maybe it complicated this one. If that's true, what I could do is say that I have three functions: replace, delete, and insert. And then for the first two, I implement replace, and then I implement these two in terms of replace. But for this one, I could switch to this. But I mean, this is close to working now. I'm not sure that, and I'm not sure that it's like an optimization problem. I don't see how the least optimal thing that I would be tempted to do here would be equivalent to removing and inserting back to back. So I'm not sure how that. Well, for one thing, I know you don't have absolute positions in your text file like I do, and so I get an op-win for making two operations into one just for that. Because otherwise, anything that does like white space clean would just be crazy. Because you can't do them, and like you'd have to do two separate passes on everything. I guess it wouldn't necessarily be terrible, but you definitely get some op wins for trying to represent your edits this way, I think. When I say absolute positions, what I mean is the ability to say like go straight to line 70, and my cursor is currently at line 0, right? And it has the ability to do that without having to like seek there. It can just look up where does line 70 start and go there, right? And in order to do that with this scheme, one of the things that has to happen is the buffers know where their start position is in the file, which isn't too hard to manage so far. The only thing that has been hard for me to manage really is the memory allocations, because like constantly like, oh, I'm out of space in the array, I need to get another couple of buffers or whatever, and now I need to actually get the buffers, like I need space for the buffers in the metadata, and then I need the actual buffers. So that's like the part I'm complaining about. Everything else is like about what I would expect in complexity, I guess. But so Martin, you're using absolute positions. Does that mean when you want to find something, you have to like linearly search through your file to find that position? Like if you want to skip to line 1000 and your cursor's at the beginning, what happens there? Do you find line 1000 right away, or do you seek to it from some other place? Yeah, I'm not clear why you would be able to skip to a certain location because it's not in the UI. Like if you're already storing metadata per line for the purpose of editing without the UI, why wouldn't you just do that so that the UI can have absolute positions? So you're saying your UI doesn't store any metadata about the file that it's looking at, is the idea, right? Like you have only only metadata you store is like cursors and stuff, the O1 stuff. You would never store something about the file that was specific to the UI, that was like an array but that was per line or per chunk. But if it's in the buffer and it's independent of what the UI does, then you don't have a problem with that, right? Is that what you're saying? Seems like when you seems like what you could do, what I do basically, is whenever a view latches onto a particular file, it generates the metadata that it needs for viewing that file, and then like throws it away when it switches to a new file or to a different, or when the view gets removed in favor of a view for a different type of data, right? So I guess if it's like a concern for speed, that makes sense. Okay, so I'm gonna start getting back into this. Where did I leave off? I decided that everything I was doing didn't make sense and it was silly in regards to this. Yeah, I see. Yes, that's I don't see. Okay, so then if that's the case, that you do inside the buffer store metadata, then do you store on each chunk or whatever you call it, like each fixed width gap buffer within the whole buffer? Do you store the starting position of that in the absolute position system, right? Like, so if you're on the third chunk, chunks 0, 1, and 2 come before you, or chunks 0 and 1 come before you. Does it know that its starting position is, you know, the sum of these two guys' size, and have that stored? These two guys' size. Have that stored. That's what I mean to say. So you don't know the start position of a buffer, but you know the length of each buffer. So when you want to go to a position, you do linearly go across your buffers, right? Like you linearly go across each page to see when you get to the correct like amount, right? Gotcha. Yeah, so I have where I store the starting position of each one of those, so I can just binary search, which I'm sure is what you have in mind. If not, I'd hear what you've got in mind. But I'm storing the starting position of each one, and I binary search to the buffer that I want to do the edits on. That's what happens right here. It finds chunks by binary searching for the start and end positions of the replacement. Fair enough. Makes sense. Well, anyway, when I'm initializing a buffer, I want to say, look, if the chunk count is 0, make it 1, you know? And then down here, go across each one. Position plus size is greater than total size. Size equals total size. Size equals. Alright, so that should come out to 0. And then those two could just put in size 1 and size 2 as 0. This becomes the whole thing. And bada bada boom. Okay. Yeah, exactly. If you do what I'm doing, the downside is that you have to update the start position of all of the buffers every time you do an edit. And the reason this whole conversation started was because I was saying that because I'm storing so much absolute position stuff, it's actually an optimal solution to do replaces, I think, because if you do a delete and an insert, and each one then has to update the start positions. So my system combines them so that when you do any kind of edit, especially ones that are going to swap some text for some other text, you get a win there, right? Because you only update start positions, and all your metadata only gets updated once instead of twice. Yeah, and the other thing, I'm sure that it shakes out in a much easier way if I don't do replace. I was just saying that that's probably why I'll stick with replace. Other than just it's the tradition I've gotten used to in my editor, right? It's kind of built in everywhere. But the other thing, what you mentioned about the difference between linearly searching when you're reading to find a position, and then making the edit fast, versus linear. Like both of them have to do with edits. It's just one of them is faster for reads, and the other is slower for reads. Right? They're both this. They both take on time to do the edit. Because what you could imagine is a world where you make an editor where you don't even store any absolute data for any purpose, and you give up a lot for that, but then you could have O1 edits for real. Which I thought about, but I'm not going to do. Like, I thought about playing with that variation, but I'm not actually going to do it because so much of 4coder has to have absolute positions that then all absolute position stuff becomes ON at best. Like, you have to do all sorts of seeking through the linked list and adding up sizes to find the start position you want, and etc. Plus, replace, another comment is once I'm doing my code refactoring stuff is like all based on replace. Like, replace doesn't happen too often in a text editor, but I think in a code editor, replace is the primary thing that you do all the time. That's the main thrust of most of my ideas, is the ability to replace a bunch of names, the ability to replace a struct with another struct or with two structs, etc. Right? So, further reasons behind it for my case, I think. That said, this is still a pain, so there's always some merit to the simpler approach too. So now what I want to do is just say if start is exactly equal to size, I'm going to get some weird behavior here. And I think what I want to do is say gap start and gap end should always fall within I could rewrite this buffer find chunk function. If I rewrite it, I could get it to round it down instead of up. Then I wouldn't need this exceptional case. Or, yeah, I think rounding down is what I would prefer for it to do for a few reasons. So, see if I can get that. The reason it doesn't round down now... Wait, why wouldn't it round down right now? This looks like it's written to round down. If you find exactly that position, that's the one you want. No. If you find exactly that position, m minus 1 is the one you want. Yes. Yes. Still breaking pretty early. That's okay. Same problem, 618192. Isn't that like bigger than, yeah, the guy that ended up with a gap size of negativeness. Shift amount plus size 1 size 2. Yeah, batch edits are even better, and I'm moving towards batch edits now. I have white space batch edits already working completely, and they're really nice because that means you don't have to do any lex work, or like very little lex work. You just have to shift tokens around in their start positions and their sizes sometimes. But batch edits, in fact, the buffer type I'm gonna work on once I get these done is all about batch edits. It's about being able to do and parallel editing so that you can like run your edits on 4 cores or any X cores, you know. That's what I'm gonna work on in once I got this done. And ropes, if I do ropes, I gotta do the ropes. I think absolutely gotta do the ropes. And I'll compare them on single edits and on batch edits and on stream speed, like how quickly I can stream stuff out. that's what I plan to do. Okay, so MIT, what, my new buffer type? It will be. It'll be in the GitHub. It'll be better than MIT. It's public domain, which is MIT compatible. You can sub-license it in any way you want. The only thing you can't do is prevent other people from getting it. That's the only thing you can't do. Yep, it'll be up there. It will. So, for me to get it up there, I'm gonna have to get this gap buffer working. Let me throw this breakpoint back in, and we'll take a look. Alt-M, works the first time. No, it breaks right away. It broke right on the first step through. So let me look at that again. Alt-M comes in. O size is 0. Size 1 and size 2. Shift amount is 560, so that will fit. What is the gap size here? Is it the full thing? Oh, the gap size is 0. Why is that? That's absurd. Okay. What? Why? Let me. Huh? Okay, so it has a chunk count of 1. It has the data in the chunk, and it knows that the size is 0. It just hasn't initialized gap size for this one for some reason. That's okay. We'll have to figure out how to get it to initialize gap size since it's not choosing not to for some reason. Bong. Stringify loop. Find chunk. End init. Okay. Gap size is that minus all that. It must be doing one gap, so start position. How do you come up with a gap size of 0? How do you do it? Okay, I need to go put a breakpoint up there. That's not even where it should have been breaking. What? What? Build that again. Does that help? Breakpoints. Maybe right here. Oops, not you. You. Count is 0. Chunk count. Oh, this is a init chunk count. I need buffer chunk count. 139. That explains it. That explains it. What's this picture of me on Imgur? Just curious. What are we talking about that I missed? Oh, you're talking about the wall of Martin Cohen, or what's the deal here? I see. Yep. Got it. Got it. Okay. So now it should have a proper gap that it can actually work with. It says, hey, size 2 is still empty, size 1 has some stuff in it now. 141 characters, gap size decreases a little bit. We put some stuff in there and it passes. And it does another edit. And it finally breaks. There we go. Alright, so what's happening here? We're getting a break. That's fine. The gap is fine. String. Copy. String mem position 0. Minus head size. Whoa. How is head size negative? Oh, we're in head size? Now that is interesting. Yes, so this strain of code happened. I need to walk through all of it. So I can put down my breakpoint here and run this again. Now, unfortunately, this isn't really predictable. It's sort of random. But there we go. Eventually it happens. And what is it that happened? Well, if I understand correctly, size 1 and size 2 got big enough such that adding in the shift amount would have gone over budget, right? 7,640 plus 581, and the budget was only 8 kilobytes. Yeah. Okay, so there's too much data to store. So it said, okay, how many empty buffers are we going to need? We're going to need a new empty buffer. And it's got its empty buffer. It comes in here and it says, okay, we can totally handle this. This isn't a problem. We've got our memory resolved at this point. So let me start moving things around. I've got all of the gaps, and I just do some shifts here which I set up earlier to get the new gaps in the right position. So to check that, let me look at gap, and I'm gonna look at the next 4 gaps actually. Okay, so this is the one where it's actually all full. Can't store anymore. This is the new one that's right in place. Uh-oh. Chunk allocked. Chunk max. Okay, so we made sure there was enough space. That's cool. Hello, CPT Dave 4, welcome. In addition to that, does anyone have... Oh, I've got it. Here it is. You might also want to check out this. This is the GitHub where I'm posting my current project. My current sub-project. Oh, 1 minute. Alright. Okay, and so now the question is, hello Swag Kitty, welcome. Let's see what's happening next. It's going to do some of the work that it has to do to move stuff around. Start is greater than size 1. Right, so that's fine. Size 1, size 2. Okay. Now I said, okay, I see where this is going. And what I probably have to do is limit how small these things get, maybe? Maybe I was sloppy there. Yeah, so I figure out the average size I'm going to need per chunk, which is not big at all. And then I say, okay. Here's my head size. Here's my tail size. Problem is the head size plus size 1, still too big. Wait, no, it's not. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. And yet it went wonky. Huh. And it seems to have gone wonky in a different direction this time. So, what's that about? Where am I even? I don't really understand what's going on here. Whoa. Buffer. We failed an assert, and that triggered a render. Okay, so let me just complain about something real quick. When I do assert, that seems to be calling my callback, asking for the window to be repainted. But why would it do that? Visual Studio, even though it never, even if I repaint the window, I can't see it. Right? This is what you always see. So what's going on there, people? It's asking my window to repaint itself, but then it's not even showing up anyway. So why should I have to deal with the code doing this? This is complicated. What I should get in exchange for this happening is that the window should look correct. Well, anyway. Here's where it actually did the assert. Let me look across my gaps here. What's my gap count? Ooh, the gap count is only 1. Well, that's just wrong right there, because this gap 2 is supposedly in action, and yet it totally isn't. Huh. Okay, so something still goes wrong. I jumped out too soon. Something still goes wrong in here. Let's make it happen. Now let's go through it and see what happens, right? So I know that I want to switch to looking at this one. Okay. So it knows I'm editing right off the end. So size 1 there, minus end, size 2 there. No, that logic is wrong. So I can't just say Yeah, that logic is like totally wrong. Okay, so what I was trying to say here is I need to shrink size 2. Even though I'm not doing any mem moves, I have like the thing. And okay, so the point is else if end is less than, if end is greater than size 1, then size 2 needs to decrease by end minus size 1. Size 1 goes to the start. Yep, that seems better. That seems like it would work. And working is 99% of the battle. Wow, size 1 is exactly 8141. Okay, this is totally wrong, now that I look at it again. Even though it didn't actually do the wrong thing, just because size 1 happens to be exactly right. There we go. That should be good. Alright. So it's coming in here, and alright, so this is where it goes. Okay, I'm out of space. The next one over will have to help me out, and we start filling in information about size 1 plus gap size of 11, 8192. D position 8192. Isn't that our whole budget? Right, okay, good. And then we do that mem copy, which is 0, so that's fine. And then we say, okay, what's happening? There we go. We say the new guy has a size 2 of 0, and he has a gap size 2. Oh, size 2 has a, okay, right. So what basically just happened there that we couldn't see was from this chunk to this chunk, it moved the right hand side, but the right hand side happens to be 0 right now. So that's fine. Middle 280. Head size, tail size are 280 and 280. That's fine. Then we'll look and see, is head size too big for anyone? This one is too big, and that's where we get the negative number. That one is so not correct. That is so wrong. Okay, 532. There we go. And then what we want is if head size is less than 0, head size equals 0. So don't go below 0 while doing that, is the other rule. Okay. So now coming along again, we get a head size and tail size of 200. Like I said, this changes every time because the pipe is so random, which is fabulous. And then goes negative, but then it goes to 0. That doesn't change, so tail size stays there. Then we figure out the new required middle size. And we're in a situation where we don't even need any middle size. Really? What's the len here? What is the len here? 400. Ooh. I think what I should do is balance it. So that means after this edit is done, right, we get here, just say if either of the sizes is super big, if size 1 is greater than fixed width buffer half size, do this stuff. If the gap size 2 is greater than that, then do this stuff. And the stuff that I want to do is basically a move size type operation. Where I'm going to move enough over that it isn't so big on one of these two sides. So basically the move amount should be however much needs to be moved to get to this situation. Right? And that's kind of interesting because it means the idea of moving text around inside of a gap buffer has become enough of a repeated concept that maybe I should have a helper that does that concept at this point, you know? So I could just say move to right hand side, move to left hand side, and then pass in a move size. Because I have it here, here, and here, and all four of these locations, and here, and it's the same in all of those, and it's the same in the normal gap buffer, right? It's just everywhere. So maybe that idea should be pulled out as like a singular unit in the future. There it is. Let's see, what do we got? So what is size 1? 7861 in this case. What's the thing we're putting in? Every time we run this, we have like a different input length, right? So the shift amount's big this time, but the amount sitting there isn't as big. But anyways, we're going to come through here and we're going to find that size 1 is bigger than that half amount. So a lot of it's going to get moved to the right. Yep, and then that decreases to exactly half, and that increases, and then when it does this work here, boom, 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 head size, tail size of 450s, that shouldn't trigger and that should trigger. So those can actually be asserts now, because they should, like, in theory, never trigger if I guarantee that neither of the two left or right hand chunks are bigger than half of a fixed width buffer, and those always fit. Because they're no bigger than a quarter of a fixed width buffer. So anyways, it's going to do all of its work. Gap is less than D gap. Really? What? 7.6. What? Seriously? Required empty buffer plus 1. Okay, I think that's wrong. Or at least the way this works doesn't match what it was in my head when I wrote it. because it shouldn't go into that for loop in this case, if I'm understanding correctly. Position equals 0. Position size 2. So looking at these two here, the first one should be getting some data now. Local start. I increased to there, and now I skip there. I set stuff up in the end buffer. The end buffer should already have some stuff, though. Not sure why it doesn't. DGAP size 2 should equal whatever size 2 was on gap. So there's a problem there. Gotta run it again. Some shifting, so now we have stuff on both sides. DGAP equals that, which is at least 1, or we wouldn't be in this branch. Size 1, 4096, 411, 4507. Deposition. Okay. Gap size plus. Okay, sure. Sure. And then mem copy for. Okay, that's fine. To the DGAP from the data here. So it does that whole copy. Okay, so it set the size to there, and then it should set gap size to 0. There, great. Head size, tail size. When does it break that? Maybe it doesn't, and I'm just crazy. Oh, I see. Right, so that's there. Actually, what I want is gaps too. There we go. Okay. Tail size is greater than tail size equals whatever. Very good. Start position is there. So this has a correct start position now. Yep. Size 1 does the gap size. And then position, okay. Oh, we still broke, and it's still going crazy because that's leading to the infinite loop in there. And it's still because the total size doesn't match the buffer size. The count is still not being incremented, interestingly. So that's probably just a failure to write the code that does that. So here we are, we've done all this great stuff, moving code around. We get to the very end. Let's do something like take the buffer's chunk count and plus in the required empty buffers, which is really my count of the buffers that are being inserted into the series of buffers. Okay, I just hit F5 without any issue. Okay, so it's imperfect. We just saw some flashes of absurdity. And now it's the metadata is messed up or something. But it's not crashing, which is nuts. Let me make sure that this works for other types of buffers still, because it is also a new experimental system still. It could be broken. Oh, yeah. It could be broken for other things. So it has to equal to, and if, and if, and if, if and if and if and if and if and if. Okay, so there's definitely some problems because this is still being stable when I stress the golden array. I could also stress the gap buffer again just to be sure. Mostly to be sure that it's still working. Yeah, so these work fine. I mean, besides the flashing colors that are incorrect because they're not, they're just random junk of whatever's there, right? But they are working the way they are intended to, so I've made some progress, but it's still under stress, has a good amount of trouble, the multi-gap buffer does. So we're not done, not out of the woods yet, still got to get these single edits working, but I think that this is a good time for me to say thank you all for coming into the stream. It's been a pretty good day, all things considered, and there'll probably be more all week because I've got an unusual week. So I'll see you guys later.